Hello and welcome back to AW Toolbox. My name is Glenn Keller, and in this video we are beginning the installation of the Teamcenter specific components and the prerequisite tasks that aren't already installed on our single box installation. So in here, in the previous video, we walked through some of the prerequisites that were on the box, things like Visual Studio Code, Java, the Oracle server, the browser, and some of the installation directories. So now we're actually going to set up the Oracle database. We'll look at the online help and how to get a local copy of that onto the box. We'll take a look at the Deployment Center install and what it requires to get it installed. And then we'll review the Deployment Center interface after the Deployment Center installation is done. Once we get all of this completed, we'll have a sideline on licensing, and that'll probably be in a separate video. And you'll be set up and prepared for going in and installing Teamcenter using the Deployment Center software. All right, so to begin in here, we're going to take a look at a couple of things. So the order of operations kind of matters here. We've got a couple of things that we want to take a look at, one of which is the database install. Now, I can tell you the database install does take a little bit of time for Oracle for the installation. Now, for MS SQL, the database creation process is super simple. It doesn't take very long at all. I think the longest part about it is the SQL Server installation. But we're going to take you through the ropes to get you almost all the way there in this video as well. So in our planning and our strategy, we've got a couple of things we want to be taking a look at. The first one that we're going to look at is the database. This is the longest one. So longest. Let's spell things correctly. Longest. All right. So we're going to take a look at the database. While that's running, we're going to install the help. We are going to take a look at the Deployment Center install and try and execute all three of these within the scope of this one video. So again, we're kind of working on things and doing them in an order that will help us with speed and time and effort. But let's go ahead and dive into the Oracle database. The first thing that we need to recap here is just remember in this box, we have C apps Oracle, and this is where we have installed the Oracle server, and then we have our software directory. I'm going to keep this box open, and I'm going to open up a separate box, and my separate File Explorer window is going to be in my media. So on the box, just remember we have C apps, media, our Siemens folder, and then our software folder. We are installing 2412. And then in here under the TC folder, we have deployment or database scripts. The database scripts include 3 different folders. Siemens used to support a DB2 database, and you can see that folder for support is here. But the primary 2 are MS SQL and Oracle. So we'll start with Oracle, and then we'll recap the information for MS SQL. In the Oracle folder, we have a bunch of scripts. Now, you don't need to technically use these scripts. You could create a general purpose database in Oracle and then select a different option during the install. However, best practice approach is to take all of these out of this directory and then place them in the software directory under Assistance, DBCA, and then Templates. And just note that your directories may be different than mine if you're working in a different build. You'll see some defaults in here. We want those to stay. Those are for the general purpose database, which is the one that you would use if you weren't choosing this method. And then you Control V to paste those in. You'll have 17 new files in this version of the software. That may vary depending on the version. And at that point, you have successfully taken your templates from the Teamcenter media to the Oracle installation. So now we're prepared to do the Oracle install. So remember, we are focusing on bare bones here. So we're not going to get into SGA sizes, PGA sizes. We're not going to get into Database Express. We're just doing the bare minimum that you need to do to get the Teamcenter database up and running, and then fall back on your DBAs for tuning the system and making sure there's enough space available if you're doing upgrades or ETLs, data migrations. So in here, now that we have that up, we have our Oracle server, and there are two components to a Oracle database. We have the database, which is your metadata, and then you have the listener. And the listener has a port that gets defined, and the port is what we communicate to in Teamcenter to connect to it. So in this case, we need to build a listener. Whether that is a part of the database creation or not, we have to build one. So I'm going to go ahead and preemptively do that. I like it for Oracle's sake because then when I build the database, it can confirm the installation. I'm going to choose Net Configuration Assistant, which allows me to build that listener. And then the Net Configuration Assistant, if I choose Next in the listener configuration page, I can add. If you already have one installed, you'll get like reconfigure or delete. I'm going to choose Next, and then I can see the listener name is here. You can change this listener name if you would choose, but I'm going to leave it to this so that you can see as a part of the entire installation process, we never really call to this listener value. So I'm going to just keep it. It can support multiple databases, so I'm just going to say Next. TCP is the selected protocol we need. And then here is your opportunity to change the port. So you can choose a different one if you need. I'm going to keep the default, which is 1521. The port does matter with regards to installing Teamcenter, so definitely jot that down. Choose Next here, and it will go through and ask you if you would like to do another one because it's going to build the listener at the end. I'm going to say no and choose Next, and at this point it will construct the listener. I'm going to go ahead and open my services window while that action happens, and in the services window you'll see a new Oracle listener service that is up and running. One key consideration for the listener is if you come into the directory where you have the Oracle installation, go into software, and then go into network. Don't rename a folder. Go into network, and then in network, if you go into admin, there's a listener configuration file called a listener.ora. And if I open that up with Visual Studio Code real quick, you can see that it has grabbed my IP address. So though this isn't my public IP address, it's my private IP address, and it doesn't change. If I built this to be distributed with a quick deploy file or something, then this would break on other instances. So maybe I've standardized my naming constructs. So I'm going to come in here and say that my host name is training01, and that is my current host name. I'm going to save it, and that way any future instances may pick up on that value rather than using the IP. Again, that's up to you and how your DNS is set up. If I come down to tnsnames.ora, there will be a copy of this getting created in our TC data. So I just want to check this hasn't been populated yet, and we are good to go. So I'm going to minimize this directory for now, click Next because my listener is complete, and then choose Finish. So at that point, I have my listener up and running, and I can move to the database install. I'm going to come back into my Oracle Aura DB19 Home, run my database configuration assistant, and in this interface it's going to give me the option to choose those templates that I had just copied over to the build. Oracle will open up. It does take a second for this GUI to launch, but this will be the location that you can create your template file for Oracle install and run via utility or command line. We're just going to walk through the GUI. So in here I've got create a database. That's what I want, bare bones. On the next page, we've got the typical configuration. I actually don't like to choose this because then you need to specify in the files what you want, but I like to choose my options with advanced. I'm going to choose next here, and now in here I do want a single instance database. I don't want real application cluster or Oracle RAC. I just want single app instance. Down below that I have my different options, so I'm going to choose Teamcenter Oracle, which is going to be the database that I support. They do support multi-tenant databases, so choose that option if you have that construct. But Teamcenter Oracle is what I want. If you did not copy the templates, then you need to choose general purpose or transaction processing. So just make your pick there. I'm going to choose next on the Teamcenter Oracle side, and then you'll have a SID. Now this SID is not going to be the same in every environment. In our case, we're going to leave it to the default, which is TC, but your DBAs may have other requirements or STIGs or something they have to work around. So the name of this may be a different name than the default. Just note that this is the identifier, the unique identifier for your database on the database server. MS SQL has a very similar construct. I am not creating a container database. I did not choose the correct option for that, so bare bones, I don't need to do that, and I'm going to choose next. I am going to use the Teamcenter templates for all the storage attributes, so that is one benefit. The database templates for that, and it's using Teamcenter Oracle to set up those defaults. That is part of the reason why I like, if I go back to this page, notice it's saying Teamcenter Oracle. That's the template it's pulling that from. So this is why I like to pre-populate the database with those templates and build it that way. In here, a fast recovery area, I always like as a safety net. I'm going to up this because you need to make sure that the size of this is greater than 2.5, I think, times the SGA PGA size. So I'm going to choose 9096. I could update the Oracle base flash recovery area, but I'm okay with that location. Choose next at this point. And now you can see my listener is confirmed. Oracle does know about it, so this is kind of why I like to do it this way. I could create a new listener down here with the same settings if I didn't have one, but I'm just going to go ahead and choose next. And at this point, you'll see that I get some additional options. You can kind of reconfigure your database as needed. I'm going to choose next as that's not required for Teamcenter. And then on the next page, I'm going to get kind of configuration options for the sizes of different things. Base settings, if you're not a DBA, just come up here, use automatic shared memory management, set these settings, and then hit go. If you are working with a DBA to set up a production instance or worried about spacing requirements, this will work for us, but it is not going to work for a production database. Definitely consult your DBAs to get the proper size for the amount of data that you have. I'm going to go ahead and choose next. And then it will begin to build an overview of the template. So in here, it'll configure the database express. I'm not using that. I have had issues with this in the past. And if I choose next again, I can set my passwords. Now, if I wanted to, I need to get into, I went back to this page, specify configuration options. And these character sets actually matter. So this is kind of a secondary thought for me. In here, use Unicode UTF-8. So if I come down here, notice UTF-16 is selected. I'm going to come down and pick the one that's actually selected for my environment. You can see UTF-8, UTF-8, UTF-8. So I like to make sure the character encoding setting is set for the database that I'm installing it on. You will get error messages in the install. They will have ant in the name. It'll be a Java error if you have your encoding settings set wrong for your database. I'm going to go ahead and choose next. And then again, the Express Manager, this is options up to your DBA, or if you're the DBA, you can choose to do it, but always refer to the support and the recommendations from the Siemens documentation to get this installed. I've never installed it and it installs just fine. Choose next. Now, if you are in a production environment, you don't want your database password and your administrative password for the database being the same. So definitely set your passwords up here for sys and system. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and just apply since this is a training environment. infodba for my password, infodba. Now that is an extremely common password. Everybody knows that one. So please make sure that you secure your database. Notice it is yelling at me that password isn't a recommended format. I'm okay with that, but definitely take that consideration and secure your environment as needed. I'm going to go ahead and choose yes. And then it's going to create my database. You can see the SQL file is going to get created here. I can save it as a database so that I have the template in the future. I could customize storage locations, do what I need to do. But baseline, I just need to click next. And at this point, I can save off my response file, which gives me kind of information about the database. So I do like to save this off. I'm going to go ahead and put it in my C drive, apps. I've got a nice place in my media for it. Go to my software. This will be my reference documents. So I'm just going to save that there. Hit finish and let that database install. Now, depending on where you're installing the database, it could take upwards of 30 minutes to 45 minutes, maybe even longer. It could also go fairly quick, especially if you're installing on a Linux environment. So that'll install for a little bit, and we have other tasks that we need to get kind of prepared for as we're getting ready for the Teamcenter environment. So we'll leave that up in the corner. Now, before we move on to those other tasks, let's take a look at the MSSQL prereqs that you'll need. So if you have MSSQL installed on your server, you'll need to make sure that it's in mix mode. Follow the Siemens documentation for the setup of that SQL server. It's pretty good. And then in here, the only consideration that you need to make is in that media folder. If you come down to software 2412 TC, we had the database scripts. You'll go into MSSQL, make a copy of this file to back it up. So all we're doing is creating a backup. And then I'm going to rename this one whatever I want, right? So this is going to be my Teamcenter. So I'll delete this, delete template off of it. And I'll actually just keep it the same, create database, but it's my Teamcenter database that I'm creating. So I'll change the name on that. Then you can open it up. I'm just going to open it with code real quick. And you'll want to go through this file and provide your values. The way that I do it is up here in the top. You basically highlight that, control find, and come in here and replace. Notice there's a lot of instances of that throughout the file. Replace it with the value. In this case, it's the SID, the unique identifier for the database. In Oracle, it was TC, so here it's TC. Hit replace all. And you'll see that it updated up here, so now you know you've already done that one. And it updated that throughout the document. Continue this, if I want to do data path, I could go to the directory where the file will live, where it's going to create the database. Username, infodba, password, infodba. Collation and language. So this is going to be like your ISO or UTF-8. This is going to be like your ENUS or French or whatnot. So you'll just continue down replacing those files. Once you get done, take it into the MS SQL Server and execute the document or the SQL file. That will create your MS SQL database, and then at that point you're ready for install. All right, so that's still installing. It's going to sit at that 30% for a little while. So let's go ahead and take a look at our help server and get that up and running. So one thing I like to do is link my application to the help server so that people have a baseline and a quick access point. Help servers can be installed on any of your servers if you're in a distributed environment, as long as all the servers can talk to it. Your rich clients are going to call to it, so you'll have to have a client-side perspective if you're behind like a gateway. But what have you, if I come into the media in here, I have preemptively downloaded the media to my reference docs, which is this component. This is the documentation for 2412, but this needs hosted somewhere. If I come back up to Siemens and I go into additional applications, The help server, in our case 321, is where you host that documentation. So it's running on the server, and you can have NX, Teamcenter, older versions of Teamcenter, all that help in one location. So if you want to install this, you're simply going to right click and run it as administrator. You can install it on Linux if you need. And when I right click and run as administrator, it'll pop up the GUI to install it. You're basically just picking a location. Then once it's done, I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to execute it on the help docs to kind of serve those up to that location. Now in here, the deployment of the database is running, and we should be checking our task manager to see what performance we're getting on the server. So you can see that it's starting to launch, but my memory is okay. My CPU utilization's about 50% or so I can do this task on here. This is unpacking the server installation for the doc server. And definitely check the version, but this version works just fine for this version of Teamcenter. I'm going to choose my language. They've got a bunch. Hit OK. And then at this point, choose Next. I can choose where I want the shortcuts. I like to get a shortcut to this so that I remember what the URL is. So yes, I could have it in a program group down at the bottom, but I like it in my other locations, and I'm going to put an icon for everybody. Hit Next, and then I can choose where to install it. In our case, we're not installing it in program files. We're coming down into the C drive, apps, and then inside of Siemens, we are creating a help server directory. So I'll say help server and hit open. So I'm going to choose Next, and you have two ports that you have to care about. So these two ports, the first one is what the interface runs on for the help server. Second port is for storage. Choose Next. And then in here, do you want it to be accessible over the network so people can access it? Yes or no? Choose Next. And then with or without SSL, you just select your certificate, your PIM file, and any key that you might need to provide. Choose Next, and then choose Install. Maybe take a screenshot of this configuration after the fact. So this is going to go through and install now. And then once it's done installing, it does take a couple of minutes to actually execute. We can go ahead and install the online help documentation on top of it. So while that's installing, it does a little prep. I'm going to come back in to my reference docs, and I have my documentation along with that Oracle response file. So here's my documentation, and I'm getting ready to run that on the server once I validate the server's installed. All the while, note my database is still installing. All right, to 100% we go. Did a little pause there. It only took about a minute during the pause, but if you choose Next, the documentation server has been successfully installed, and you can see where. You can choose Done, but I like to click this little click here to verify installation. Now it should have put a link on my desktop for me or in my start menu, and if I come in here, you'll see I didn't really get one. So a little bit of a worry there, as I did check the boxes. So I'm going to click verify installation. It does open up and I've got it. So I'm just going to go ahead and bookmark that. Documentation server, I don't really need the version on there. And I'm going to shorten this up and just say doc server. Hit done, and I've got the doc server up at the top. So at that point, just one thing to reference here is in your services, you now have the Siemens documentation server, Siemens PLM documentation server up and running, which is hosting that application. All right, so now we can go ahead and run the media installation. So I'm going to come back, go to my reference docs, and there I've downloaded the media package from the downloads location. I'm going to right click on this and choose Run as Administrator. In my case, I like to do that to ensure the correct permissions. It's going to set up and run. Now, this deployment does take a little bit longer as it has to copy all the media and information down and deploy it out to that installation. So here, we're still looking at the Oracle installation running kind of in the background here, so we're still making our way forward. Once this launches, you'll get kind of a similar interface, that nice, clean, fresh, white look that Siemens is providing with some of the software packages nowadays. And then we can choose kind of what server we're installing it on. The only server that's deployed will be what we get, but you have a couple of different options along that installation path. I'm going to go ahead and move this down a little bit and minimize my window. And then in here you can see that the help server is still up, so I'm going to click done on that one. That's when it creates the shortcut for us on the left hand side, just as a post execution to closing that box. And you can see my little spinny wheel is still going. 16 gig of RAM was a little low for this one, so we're going to let that pop up. All right, we got a little splash screen for a second there. It only took about 20 more seconds after we took that break. So we got a little splash screen, Siemens nice green one, and then we get this nice white look for the dialog. I'm going to click OK. And then in here you can see it confirms that we're installing 2412. Choose next. And then it will go through and kind of read that package. What we're waiting on is simply just for the interface to run and install. So this is kind of a pre-prep for the installation, and then once it's done, we'll have the actual install. Alrighty, it's picking up pace. A lot of the Teamcenter installation is really revving up to wait. So a lot of the bigger tasks like installing the database or installing the Teamcenter Foundation, it's a lot of work to kind of get it prepped, have all your prereqs in place. However, actually doing the installs, barring any errors that pop up, isn't really a lot of work. It's just waiting. You can see this has made it to 75. And we've got the install going. So you can see now that it's extracted all the documentation locally, the actual install up to the server is running just fine. Couple more minutes. You can see what it's doing now is resetting the documentation index and importing that documentation index to the server. This is kind of like the search for that documentation to help you kind of look around. Now, mind you, in these videos, we're not going to fall back on the documentation or anything like that, but it is something that we want to make sure that we have as a resource. You'll see throughout the installation, there's several asks for it when you're installing rich clients or active workspace. To point to it so they can create a tile or a command that actually opens it up from that respective client so the user has access to it. Alrighty, so it is at 100%. You can see it says click next to continue. I'm going to click next here, and then we have launched the Siemens documentation server. We've already got a bookmark for that, so you could click it and launch it and you can see it pops up, but I'm going to go ahead and close it for now and close the other one, minimize this, and hit done in the application. So at that point, if I launch it from this little shortcut on the desktop, you can see it opens up. And then if I click the Teamcenter 2412 documentation, it'll launch like this. This will represent very similarly to what is deployed on the Siemens site. And now you have your local documentation and URL that you'll need to reference it. I'm going to close that. And now our database is still installing pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and switch gears and get the deployment center installation up and running. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is get deployment center installed. This is the third release that we've been demoing the installation for this. The installation hasn't really changed too much here. So a couple of things with the installation is, let me see if I can shrink this down. That's about as small as it goes. The biggest things here is with Deployment Center, if you go to your media location, Siemens, and then go into your software, Teamcenter 2412, and then your install folder, you have the Deployment Center folder. Now, this folder contains the media, and I like to, just like I did with Oracle, keep the media kind of respective to where the server is. There is another Deployment Center folder inside of this folder that needs to retain. So what I like to do is I extract this data. So I'm just going to extract it real quick so that we can see what's in it. The extraction does not take very long. It's just a couple of minutes once it gets started. So we'll extract the data. Once it gets extracted, in this subfolder, you can see there's another Deployment Center folder. And then in that folder, there'll be the scripts to actually do the installation. So since this has already begun the extraction, and I can see in this folder, I have my installation configuration file. So the Deployment Center bat file that's right here is what I'm going to use to actually install the tool. The install configuration file is what I'm going to use to configure what the tool does. There's going to be 4 services. Each service has credentials and a port it needs to run on, plus secondary ports for different processes, plus file paths for the installation. So I need to configure this. If I come back over to the Deployment Center build, what I'm going to end up doing is simply renaming this folder, the Deployment Center folder, to match the case on this one. And then I'm going to take this one and copy it to where I want to install the server. So it's fairly simple, but we're still waiting for this to finish. And then once this completes its extraction, we can begin that process. Now, a lot of you are like, if I'm trying to do this as fast as possible, I could probably come in here and begin editing the install config file. But see how things are still populating in here? I don't want to touch that too quickly. I guess I could make a copy of it out to the server. We're going to just be a little bit more patient at this point and allow it to finish its copy. So we're going to go ahead and pause it. We're still keeping the Oracle installation up and running on the right hand side. So when we come off that pause, you're going to be able to see it fully extracted and the Oracle installation is still running. All right, so just about 60 seconds left on that one. It finished up, and you can see in this Deployment Center folder, we now have additional resources, which is a Jetty installation. We have this additional tools, which is the one-step installation tool for Deployment Center, as well as the Teamcenter folder with different configuration aspects for what versions, and compatibility tools. If I go back up, go into Deployment Center, this is going to be the installation center essentially for Deployment Center. And then there's a README here that you can take a look at. If you open it up, it'll tell you more about getting to the README and the information. So in here, if I go to the Deployment Center subfolder, I have Deployment Center right here. So before I get into all this, I don't like messing around with my media. It took a little bit to extract that. So I'm going to come up to this Deployment Center folder with the camel case, and I'm going to copy this extracted folder. I'm actually going to cut it so that it works a little faster, and I've still got the backup zip right here. Then I'm going to take that and paste it where I want it to be installed. So under the Siemens folder, I'm going to say paste, and you can see that I have Deployment Center and then the content, and that's what I'm aiming at. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to match the case. So Deployment Center, this is completely optional, it's just my preference. And then in that Deployment Center folder, I'll begin to make the tweaks. And that way I have a fallback. If I come back up, I've got this install config, and we can begin to go ahead and edit that installation configuration file. I'm going to go ahead and move this up. We can still kind of see if this completes in the background. Now, this installation configuration file is essentially just the inputs required to install Deployment Center. So a couple of things that you want to pay attention to is enable software analytics. This is a feature of Siemens that collects information about what you've installed in the software. They like to use that information to do various things, improve the product or whatnot. So you can provide your information here on whether or not that's going to be enabled. If you don't do that, which I'm not going to do, you'll see it pop up in the application once you log in. So down here, though, this is going to be the web server. This is actually Deployment Center's interface and what you're going to see and interact with. So I want to put this in the same location that I put my other components. So you can see I put this in Apps Siemens Deployment Center. So my goal is to have the web server right next to it, and then eventually my repository there. So this is the path I want, which is C Apps Siemens Deployment Center. Now pay attention to the slashes. So the slashes need to be double here. I'm going to paste this in, and then I'm going to duplicate the slash on this side. And there'll be a couple of places, I could have done a find replace all, but there'll be a couple of places that we need to update this. So I'm going to grab the newly edited one, copy that, and then I'm going to come down and I can see it right here as well. This is for the repository directory, which is where your deployment scripts and your first software repository will be. And then from that point on, if I scroll through it, there are no other directories that need to be edited. So that's the two components that are going to get installed, two folders to expect. And then you have ports to update. So 8080 is actually my Wildfly port. So I'm going to change this to 8085. It's not a port that I use in the system. The component here is the Deployment Center interface. So the service that's going to run it, I'm going to add a Teamcenter _ to the prefix. And the reason I do that for these is because I want to make sure all my services are grouped together as much as possible. So I'm going to add Teamcenter to the name as well. And then down below for the repository service, which is going to pick up on new media I put into the directory, or take care of generating and building the deploy scripts. In here, I have a port that is 8090, and 8090 is actually 9090 is my visualization port, 8089 is my visualization assigner port. In here, what I'm going to simply do is update this one just in case. You should take an inventory of the ports that you use and be able to compare it to this, but 8093 will work for me in this build. The repository service, same thing. I like to group them into a Teamcenter set of services so they're all in one place. And then I like to add the name for consistency. There is also this publisher service, so I'm going to say Teamcenter for this one as well. And then you have the ports down below, 8081 and 61616. Neither one of those need to be updated for a basic install, but again, check your ports. If I scroll down further and just double check that I didn't miss anything here. If I scroll down further, I have my user information for Deployment Center. Now pay attention to some of our extra blog posts and information about potentially encrypting your password that is supported with the Deployment Center. But in my case, I'm going to keep the default dcadmin. Again, here's your password file if you needed to encrypt the password and point to that file directory. Now below that, we have the extra software directory. So this is extremely important. I'm going to uncomment this one. So if you don't set this value, it's going to pull the media it uses for building systems from that repository software folder. So it's going to install a repository here. It's going to put a software folder there, and then you have to copy your media into that. So I already have my media in the system at the Siemens or at the media Siemens software location. So if I wanted to use this directory rather than the one it creates for me or in addition to, I'm going to take this at the top level. Now you can have like a Teamcenter and an active workspace folder in here if you need. But at the top level above those, I'm going to take that and paste it in here. Now make sure you get your double slashes to stay consistent. And now it'll pull and source information from that as well. Now take note that my Oracle database has completed. So as we were going through this, it completed. If I wouldn't have taken a couple of pauses, we would have probably got to executing Deployment Center. But this is ready to go. I'm going to minimize it for now. Now in here, I've got my software directory where I'm going to pull my media from. And just note that the repo service that handles the software and the deployment files is a service. So if I'm in Windows, I need to provide a service name. Now, if you're in Linux, obviously it'll install the scripts. You can run it with a no-up. You can also define a service to execute it. It's up to you. But in here, I'm going to delete the pound and then add my user for my OS, which is InfoDBA. I did include this for the domain, so make sure that you do that. It will definitely error out on the installation. If you don't, I need to provide a password, and since this is a training environment, my password is this. And then notice there's encrypted password settings. If you wanted to encrypt the password for the installation, and you would set that to true, and then there's a Vault service. But my Deployment Center service, my UI over here, I've got Deployment Center OS username is going to be InfoDBA, and then OS username or user password is going to be InfoDBA. Again, operating system account. Only Windows for those two. Now, the scripts directory I do like where it puts them, so I'm not going to add one of these yet, but pay attention to our extra blog posts on potentially using the maintenance flag with the Deployment Center utility to update and add additional output directories for your scripts. If you had one now, you could apply it by making sure it's the same format as this, but wherever you want those scripts to be built. Down below, it gets into HTTPS settings, certificate stores, your trust passwords. It also gets into your Vault management for adding, again, securing your information in Deployment Center. Take a look at other videos as we dive into that. In this video, we're staying to the basics. So in here, it's got a couple of ports. Just make sure those ports work for you. Here's 8091, and if I do a control find for this port, there's only one in this file. So that's why I set that first one 8090 to 8093. This one's 8091, and they didn't collide. Now the Vault service name, this does get installed, so I'm going to go ahead and provide a Teamcenter_DC Vault and a Teamcenter space Deployment Center, and provide those last couple of OS values. Got that. And then I have, gotta make sure I'm typing in the right spot. We'll do InfoDBA. For the password, we don't need that. And we are good to go. So this file is now complete for a basic install. And we have a separate software location. So I'm going to save that file and close it. And now I'm ready to do my Deployment Center installation. So I'm going to simply just open Visual Studio as administrator and show you what that looks like and use that to do the deployment. I'm going to say run as admin, and that way the terminal has the permissions needed to do this. I'm going to full screen it, and then I'm going to say file, open folder. Now you can run it in a standard command prompt if you want. I'm going to go into the Deployment Center folder. This is, if I go into Siemens Deployment Center, I've got it right here. That's the folder I want to open. It will reload and I can see all the tools. Then I'm going to come up to the top and go into New Terminal. And then down at the bottom right hand side, that's over here, I'm going to click that little down arrow. I don't want to run it as PowerShell. I want to make sure I pick the command prompt and delete with this little trash can icon the PowerShell one. Now in here, I have seen a little bit of weirdness in here, so I like to do just I know I can't see anything but type CLS and hit enter, and then it pops up. So it's a little display error. So at this point, it's very simple. We need to just run that deployment center.bat file or .sh equivalent for Linux. And then there's a couple of arguments. If I say deployment _center and -h, this will give me the help for that file. You can also open it. But the help is really cool. It tells me all the arguments that I might need, and then it gives me examples on what I need to do to run maintenance scripts, or in our case, use an input file to do the install. You could also not use the input file and specify all of those arguments in the command line. In our case, I'm going to use this one, which is deployment center install, and then the input file I just modified. And that will install Deployment Center, assuming you did everything you needed to. I'm going to say CLS to clear the screen, and then I'm going to push the up arrow to bring back my command, and then provide install dash, and then remember, you could always use H again after another utility if you forgot a component here. So in our case, it's input file with a capital F. So I'll CLS again, up, and then it's input file. And I'm going to provide my C apps media or C apps deployment center, Siemens deployment center, if I can remember my paths. Go into the deployment center again, and that's where I want. But in this case, I'm already CD'd to that directory because I have it open in Visual Studio. So you can see the directory at the beginning of the command prompt is already there. So I can just put input and just look to the left-hand side to validate the name of it. It's install config .properties. At that point, go ahead and run the tool, and it will go through. Now, if it fails or anything, it will tell you. I'm going to go ahead and choose no for the product excellence program at the moment. And then you can run through and say, and wait for the installation to complete. Now, this installation can take somewhere between 10, 15 minutes, no more than that typically, but we'll come back as soon as the installation completes. It is only about those 14 steps. All right, coming back from the pause, this took roughly 10 minutes to execute. And what you can see here is the Deployment Center installation script. If I pull this up real quick, has pretty good output. So it installed the Deployment Center WAR file onto the web server. It copied the media in, it set up the repository, set up the services, and then you can see each of the services were started and installed. And then it gives you the URL for Deployment Center right here. So that URL, I want to save that off. So I'm going to create a bookmark for it just so I remember it. 8085 is inside of the install config file, but that / deployment center is going to get me. So I'm going to come in here and just create a new page. And let's bookmark this. Let's paste it. Make sure it's up and running. And then you can see the install, the login page. Now, at this point, you could put this in, but I'm just going to go ahead and bookmark it real quick. Deployment Center. Nope, I don't want that. I want the new one. Let's hit done. And then I'll get rid of this extra tab I put in here. So now we have Deployment Center, and if I click it, it takes me back. Go to Doc Server, Deployment Center, back to login. So I'm going to log into it, DC admin. Remember, this was inside of the config file, and then you get this interface. So we'll go into Deployment Center and the usability of it, but just validate your environments, which is your Teamcenter environments, your machines, which are the servers used to build this out. The software repositories have your media in it, as well as the zip that we have in ours. We're using that as kind of a tutorial. And then the getting started gives you links and information about learning Deployment Center. Couple of things. Click the name at the top to sign out properly. Once you're finished with it, And then after the Deployment Center installation is there, you'll notice that there are Deployment Center utilities in that additional folder that it gets created. If I minimize this, we can validate the folders by coming into Apps, Siemens, Deployment Center, and now you'll have a repository and a web server. The repository has your deploy scripts, and this is where your deploy scripts will get generated. You also have quick deploy configurations that you can set up for different modules, and then DC contributions for Teamcenter. If I come back out, the repository actually also has a software folder, and this is the other media location you could copy your media into and it would know about it. And then out here you have the web server, which is the actual hosting of that interface. You can see that there are scripts to recreate the services in here and other utilities that you may need. So Deployment Center is installed, and now we can backtrack just a hair and just validate our database installation succeeded. Now just note that the validation I'm about to run is Oracle specific. So you can log in and validate your database in the MS SQL Server if you need to prior to installing Teamcenter. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and open a command prompt. I could just use the Visual Studio Code, but I'm going to switch back and forth a little bit. So in here, I'm going to say SQL plus infodba at, and my SID. So mine was TC. The reason I'm doing this is those templates should have created this user in the database. And you can see I can log in. That validates it. You can do an equivalent type of thing inside of MS SQL. I'm going to exit. I'm also going to log in with SQL plus system infodba, which is the password I provided. And you can see that I can log in as my system credentials. So at that point, my database is installed as well, and I can come into my services window, go to Oracle, and I can see my Oracle Service TC. That's my SID at the end. Now, the last thing I like to check for Oracle is just to make sure those configuration files in the Oracle installation. This will be inside of software. If I come down to network, admin, I've got the listener aura and the TNS names aura. I want to make sure that both of those are set up to communicate with my host name rather than my IP address. You can see that the one I had modified earlier is still set. And then if I come in and open up the TNS names, you can see this one has picked up on my host names. So that's what I wanted to validate with Oracle. I can close all of these. Let's go ahead and close the rest of these tabs. Kind of clean up a little bit. And I'll close this. So we have installed the Help Server, we have installed Deployment Center, and we have installed the Oracle database and spoken about MS SQL. We hope you got a lot out of this almost 1 hour demonstration on getting Teamcenter's prerequisites installed. Don't forget about your license server. We've broken that out into a separate video. And once you are done with all of that, definitely take a look at the next video because you're ready to set up Teamcenter and deploy.